How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, we're going to go back to the Emmanuel Haro case today. We're going to focus once again on Jacob Haro. Today's discussion is going to be from victim to offender, understanding child abusers who were once victims. As we know, the public defender's office, who is defending Jacob Haro, is now utilizing that as a way to give us a better understanding of who Jacob Haro was. Now, obviously, we all know most likely there's enough evidence here to showcase that Jacob Haro is an experienced child abuser. We know of his past history, what he did 2018 to Promise Faith, and now Emmanuel Haro, the 7-month-old who has gone missing, him and Rebecca both being accused with murder. Even though they have not found the child, they believe, I guess, that there's enough evidence to showcase that there was a pattern of abuse and most likely would have led to the death of their 7-month-old Emmanuel Haro. Now, we do have their court. Let's see, we got September 16th, they're back in court. And then September 17th, I think, is when they start to present the evidence to see if it's going to go to trial. But what I want to do today is bring on mental health counselor Denise Schonwald. She's been on my show before. We discussed Lake and Snelling case not too long ago. I thought I could bring her back on again today and we can discuss this type of defense and really kind of explore in depth. I mean, does this really shape who someone is? And if so, and if you know that could be the case, why have children? So I'm not really here to give Jacob Haro an excuse, because in my mind, to be honest with you, I do think it's an excuse. I think it's something that winds up getting pushed as a way to blame something else, to minimize your own level of accountability. But I'm not a mental health counselor, so I think this is going to be a great dialogue. We're going to revisit a little bit about the case real quick, and then I got some questions for Denise that I think will be interesting to explore. And again, you got the argument from the defense that may, if this goes to trial, push what could be mental health concerns related to his childhood experiences. And then you got the prosecutor that will probably push, hey, listen, this happens to a lot of individuals, and they don't turn out to be abusers who kill their children. So do we have an excuse or do we have a justification? I mean, that's the question here. Let me get Denise. Hey, Denise.
Hi, nice to see you.
Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for always making yourself available. I was trying to kind of think of a few topics today, but this one happened to come up in my feed. I think eventually I'd like to do a show with you about the difference between female sex offenders and male sex offenders, because lately in the news, I've been seeing a lot of things about female sex offenders, mostly teachers. And if you guys are interested in that, let me know and we could make an effort to revisit that discussion. But in the meantime, Denise, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Hello. Licensed mental health counselor, practicing here locally in Sarasota, Florida, but I also see clients nationwide across the country.
Yes, and it's always a pleasure having you, Denise.
Thank you.
I'm excited. So again, the title is From Victim to Offender, Understanding Child Abusers Who Were Once Victims. So I want to just break down a little bit about Jacob Haro's history here. So as you guys know, guys, I would definitely recommend that you go to check out our other videos if you're not familiar with this case, because we've covered a lot. We've covered the incident itself, who's going to crack first, how to get past his assessment the first time around, the risk assessment, like how was he able to procreate again after what he did in 2018. So Jacob, right now, Jake Haro is the father of a 7-month-old Emmanuel, charged in his son's abuse and death. Again, his wife is Rebecca Haro. They both kind of made up a story. Rebecca Haro actually went on the news claiming that while she was trying to change her baby in the Big Five store, whatever it is, I think this is around August 14th, someone came from behind her, said hola, knocked her out. When she woke up, the baby was gone. She ran into the Big Five store and basically asked for help. Eventually, this got put on the news, and I think around August 22nd, if I'm correct, they started to find inconsistencies in their story, and then eventually they both got arrested for murder. And as of this date, we don't know where Emmanuel Haro is. When they did the the conference, the press conference, they do say they may have an idea of where he is, but at this point they haven't discovered his body. So I'm going to focus a little bit on Jacob's story to explore the broader phenomenon of how do some victims of childhood abuse become abusers themselves. And again, this is just a perspective. It's not in any agreement or giving someone an excuse, but I thought maybe me and Denise can kind of discuss it. Maybe it is just excuse. Maybe during our discussion we could weed some of that out. And I want to talk a little bit about Jacob's own traumatic childhood and how it may not excuse his actions, but it may help us understand the cycle. I think that's the key. So Denise, when we see cases like Jacob Haro, someone who was severely abused as a child and later killed his infant son, how do we make sense of this tragic pattern? So let me give you a little bit about Jacob's childhood, what they're saying now. The lawyers have said that Jacob was removed from his own parents due to drug and domestic violence issues in his family home as a child. Jacob was separated from his parents during his youth due to chaotic home environment involving substance abuse and domestic violence. This early separation and trauma during critical developmental years set the stage for his later inability to parent safely. That's what they're trying to say. And then I have a little bit more here. I got a little bit more when it comes to that. Let's see. Moved from his parents to drug abuse and domestic violence in a home. His mother reportedly struggled with addiction. His grandfather had mental illness. And by the early teens, Jacob had his siblings were placed with an adopted family. Lawyers argue this separation during critical years left him without proper coping skills or models for parenting. But there is a bigger picture. They say about 30% of abused children go on to abuse their own kids, meaning most break the cycle, but the risk is real. So for the first question, real quick, sorry. Denise, when we see cases like Jacob Haro, someone who was severely abused as a child and later killed his infant son, how do we make sense of this tragic pattern?
Well, unfortunately, we see a lot of, even with drug abuse, childhood abuse, and so forth, these behaviors get modeled for us. And a lot of children will grow up and all of a sudden they exhibit the same behavior tendencies. The fact that he grew up in a very abusive home likely tells me that he didn't have proper bonding. And when children don't have proper bonding, they can develop personality disorders such as antisocial personality disorder, where they lack empathy and they don't have that nurturing skill tendency, and they can grow up, unfortunately, to do very horrific things.
Right. So it says here, trauma rewires the developing brain, harming impulse control and empathy. And a lot of people do believe that Jacob may have impulse control because, again, his first daughter, Promise Faith, when she was about 10 weeks, I mean, there was a pattern of abuse with her too, but ultimately broke her ribs. Right now, she only has about, she's I think 7. So she has 3% of her brain function. She can't walk, can't see, can't talk. She basically needs to be taken care of for the rest of her life. And in 2018, he did this. In 2023, he was found guilty, but they pretty much only gave him work release, technically. Maybe one day in jail with the rest work release. But they do believe that a lot of his actions are related to impulse control. So basically, he doesn't have it. So we were thinking maybe if the baby's crying and the baby's acting up, all of a sudden when he loses control and the baby doesn't listen, he may lash out and abuse the child. Yes. But do you think that for him, trauma that he's faced does rewire him as his brain is developing at such a young age?
Yes, it's interesting because this was actually one of my questions on my board exam when I became licensed. And it was, how do children develop this anti-personality disorder? And some of the theorists said, well, it's lack of proper bonding when they're infants, because that initial bonding with a parent or someone is so important that they don't seem to get that. But as I started into the many years of practice, what I've noticed with children that have this, that eventually as adults develop antisocial personality, are they usually have a parent or two that has a drug addiction, some sort of addiction, and often abuse. And that seems to be what I have seen, one of the things that will cause this to develop. But this lack of impulse control, lack of empathy, lack of compassion is basically the characteristics of antisocial personality.
So that's a good point. So do you think the bonding does help someone develop empathy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems to develop connection. And what they're, initially they used to see this with children that were adopted. It's very important. Some people that they'll have volunteers actually go into the nurseries and just rock babies, because this bonding is so important when babies are newborns, that they feel that love and connection, and they start to develop that bond.
I remember reading something too, where when the baby doesn't truly know how to communicate, whatever, it does know how to read the mother's responses,
Yes.
even if it's just facial gestures or whatnot. And then I guess if you don't have that bond at the very beginning, as you get older, are you able to recognize it? And not just surface wise, but also some level of depth to it. Does that make sense?
Well, it's interesting because we can feel connection and we feel energy. Little children and animals are very sensitive to energy. And when an infant is born, it's very important that they get that comforting, nurturing bond with someone, or with another person, so that they develop a proper developmental cycle.
Right. And now, I know, like, when we go to look to help people rehabilitate, one thing is we look for ownership, and sometimes they try to minimize what they've done by trying to bring up their family, trying to bring up their past, and usually a good percentage of them will tell them that they had a troubled past, and some of it may be true, some of it may not. Some of them could create stories because they know that the public may sympathize with them. But for me, I guess when you're in the business long enough, and you kind of hear those stories, and sometimes those stories are being misused, you don't really form sympathy. You really form someone that has yet to lack some level of ownership of who they are. I mean, you got someone that's 32, committed his first offense in his 20s in 2018. You figured, he would have learned at some level, like, you got to control yourself. You are a monster, what you did to this girl. But then to redo it again in 2025, it's like, okay, well, at this point here, do the lawyers still want to continue to push the blame on his past life and how he was abused, or do they want to start saying, hey, this person really does need to be held accountable, because at this point he's in his 30s? When are you able to say, you know what, that was my past, but this was me. I did this. I own what I did.
Yes, and that's the part that you won't hear. I mean, unfortunately, like the first instance the first circumstance, that's not something that usually they can recover and do better. I mean, certainly accidents happen, but this sounds like it was out and out abuse. And, this poor little 7-year-old has lifelong problems that she'll probably never recover from. Yeah. And then the situation just repeated.
Yeah. And sadly, you got Emmanuel Haro now, who, we're assuming he's dead. I mean, I guess there's enough evidence to assume that, but it kind of went through the same cycle. And I got to ask something. So I know there are people, kind of going off my script here, but I know there are people that do believe that this could have a major effect on somebody. But the people that may believe that, do you think they also enable it? Like, basically it gives them an excuse. Is it hard for a counselor to admit that maybe this could have an effect, but you're using it as an excuse instead of doing something to correct it?
Well, what I would be looking for as a counselor is whether or not there is a personality disorder. So for me, we make choices and we have consequences. We certainly have to take responsibility for our choices. So, whether, you made a good point right in the beginning, people grow up in abusive homes and they don't go on to continue the abuse. They get help. Hopefully they work through it and they do better. But some people just don't. They just become more and more sick with whatever mental illness that they're struggling with, and they do more and more damage, which will go down generations if not, held accountable.
Yeah, and then where's the remorse? I mean, I wonder if, because when you have the lack of empathy developed at, as I said, as a very young age, because you don't have the bonding, does that develop into some level of psychopathy?
Right. Well, and it doesn't develop. So you either have it or you don't. You either have empathy or you don't. Sometimes the court will order counseling, and there's nothing that a counselor can do to teach somebody to have empathy. They either have it or they don't. And if they don't have it, they're just going to continue to do more and more, crimes until they end up going, into the correctional facility.
Yeah, I remember working with a counselor a while back, and they said you have primary psychopathy and secondary psychopathy, where primary is basically it's in you. Very hard to go ahead and defeat that because you just don't have empathy. I mean, you could fake the funk, but you truly don't have empathy. But the secondary is usually something that's affected by your social network, pressure, how you react to the pressure. So that's usually something that they can work with. And they say that usually most of the time people may have secondary psychopathy, but they don't always have primary. So which means that they say, like in the prison setting, obviously you're going to meet a lot of people that definitely have antisocial behaviors, but it doesn't mean they suffer from psychopathy. But with that said, if you could work on shifting their mindset to let them know what their actions do hurt others, some of them will turn around. They'll feel remorse because they may just be antisocial. But then there are some, a smaller population, but still a relevant population that you're not going to be able to reach them. I mean, they have no empathy, and that's the main driver for why they're antisocial, as opposed to doing it the other way where they're antisocial, and that's what makes them view the world a bit differently. But if you can correct that, then they start seeing things in a different light. But if it's the other way around, where the foundation is they have no empathy, well, basically, to be honest with you, we'll go through the motions, but at the end of the day, I know I'm dealing with something that could possibly be hopeless.
Yeah. And the antisocial personality essentially is they don't have any empathy. Now, if it's a little bit more milder than that, it's usually considered narcissism. And narcissism, as we talked about last show, can go on a range. But once the antisocial personality diagnosis gets given, that basically is a lack of empathy. It's a lack of remorse. It's a lack of of wanting to experience consequences for the choices that they make. They're actually very dangerous personality disorder.
Right. So if they do have I know, like for someone under 15, it may be conduct disorder.
Correct.
They don't want to.
Actually, it's at 18. Yeah.
18. Sorry,
right.
18. Yeah, and I do know, like what I was reading, and I would love your thoughts on this because it could relate to this as well, is that antisocial, if that's all they have, they may be able to shift them a little bit because these are people that may be able to turn around. And I see that every day in the prison set. I see people that may come up with a different mindset, but eventually you start introducing them to things that showcase the consequences of their actions. Like even we have programs on Focus on the Victims, where we have victims of certain crimes that tell them their story and how it affected them. And some of them actually do have remorse because they've never taken the time to see things from that perspective. But then there are some that I believe have that primary psychopathy where it's like, you know what? I really don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're for me, very scary because it's interesting with that type of individual. If you look into their eyes, you don't feel any connection. You don't feel any heart. And if you ever look at like a bunch of pictures of people who are serial killers, they all have this same sort of blank stare. It's very cold. It's very chilling. And they will just as soon do a horrific crime and then go have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? Jake Haro's case, you figure if he really had any type of remorse, he wouldn't have done it the second time. That's why I really start to see him at some level of, I don't want to say psychopathy, but I really don't think he cares. Yeah. I just don't think he cares for others.
Yeah, and believe it or not, it's really not that difficult to diagnose. I mean, when I see somebody for an hour, there's certain questions that you can ask where it's very apparent that, like, you can say, like, well, didn't you feel bad when this happened? Or tell me about this. And the way that they either describe the incident, it really has no feeling, no empathy, no compassion. So it sounds like it's really difficult to diagnose, but it really is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's good that you said that because some books will say, I think they say that there really is like, some of the stuff is very hard to diagnose because it relies on what the person says. But then there's the checklist by Robert Hare that actually provides, I think it's like 20 questions. 10 are related to more of who you are. And then the other 10 are more related to environmental pressures or whatever it is. And that's pretty much a good list. But ultimately, anything could be weakened if you're trusting so much of what the person's telling you without really doing your due diligence. So they do recommend that outside of interviewing, you look at the charges, you look at their history, you look at their pattern, because their pattern is extremely important. And he has one. What he did in 2018 is why I think the second time around with Emmanuel Haro, they're calling him an experienced child abuser, because he now has a pattern, put a child around him, and this is what he does. So I got, so two questions before we get to the next section is, how should traumatic childhood experience be weighed in court cases involving abuse?
Well, again, certainly, I mean, that's part of maybe why it happened, but still, we still have consequences. We still have responsibilities. If I get pulled over speeding, through a school zone, and I go, well, it's because my husband got mad at me. I mean, yeah, that might be an excuse, but I still have to take responsibility for being behind a vehicle. I mean, we still have to have some sort of accountability for the things that we do and choose.
And I think, honestly, if this was to ever go to trial, I would like to think that his past, what he did to that girl in 2018, because they are going to be allowed to bring that in. That's what they're being told if it gets to that point. I think at that point, when you look at what happened to that little girl, and then he tries to put an excuse, people just won't weigh that in inequality. They're like, nah, now it really is an excuse. You're not going to be able to show me what you did to that little girl, which had to have been something where it was repetitive. You could have stopped yourself many a times and you didn't. And now you went ahead and did this to Emmanuel. So I'm sorry. I'm not going to listen to anything you had to say, because if God forbid, if you hit that child once, why didn't you stop the second time? Why didn't you go seek help? Why did you not call the police? Why did you not turn yourself in? All these things showcase that the person had no remorse. And now you want us to feel for you? The world doesn't work that way. And the second question I got is, what do we know about children raised in homes with drugs and domestic violence? Are they at greater risk for repeating patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I had been on a case once where a family had adopted two little boys that came out of a very horrific upbringing with a lot of abuse and drugs and so forth. And so they adopted them as very young. I think they were like an infant and two, but the children grew up to be very violent. And so the parents that had adopted the little boys, went to an attorney, and they're like, we don't want them, we're afraid, we're locking our doors at night. And the attorney basically said, well, you can't return children after you adopt them. This is why it's so important to know the child's history before you, make a decision like this. But, and you had thought with the infant that, that the baby was taken, so early, but it still had really been affected by, not only the environment, but also probably the pregnancy, if the mom was taking drugs when she was, pregnant too.
So do you think, like, the pattern of abuse, the fact that there could have been times where you stopped, but you didn't, there could have been times when you told on yourself and you didn't, there could have been times where you were truly remorseful and you didn't. I mean, at that point, when does what they're saying as a defense to minimize accountability just become an excuse, or is it ever even a justification?
It's not a justification. I mean, again, we still have consequences for our choices, and it's just not something that we can say, oh, well, then okay, then it's okay for you. I mean, that's just not going to be how it's going to work.
Yeah, so I have here some neuroscience here that came up, damaged brain versus personal choice. That's kind of what we're almost discussing here. So Jacob, a little bit about Jacob's backdrop. His lawyers say exposure to violence and instability disrupted brain development, because at that age, they put the age 13, which is a very important age for developing. Usually around the same time as puberty. And the defense argument is childhood trauma leaves measurable neurological scars, impairing empathy and self-control, which we kind of discussed. And then the counterpoint, the argument against that would be neuroplasticity means brains can adapt, and many trauma survivors function safely and productively. So the key tension is abusive behavior. Is abusive behavior a product of lasting neurological injury, or is it still a matter of choice? So Denise, how much weight should brain science carry when evaluating violent offenders?
Yeah, but even if it, and you're right, there is there neurological damage, and certainly if they did an MRI or CAT scan, they could see that. But what happens because the brain becomes damaged or certain parts of the brain are not developing is that does affect choice. So they're unable to make the choice because of the way that the brain has not developed appropriately, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front, which develops to make better decisions and what they call executive functioning.
And now the funny thing is, even I know the next question is this: understanding the neurological effects of trauma change how we respond to adult abusers. The reason why, I mean, even if it was to draw sympathy, it doesn't mean they're less dangerous.
Yeah.
So well, I could sympathize and say, oh, it's a shame that they went through this, and it's a shame that now they're this person, but they are this person, and therefore I still don't want them around children, and therefore I still think there's consequences to what they've done.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Yep.
You could always add more if you want. I know I went to go. I'll take the spot.
You said it so perfectly. It really, that was exactly correct.
I'll take it. Am I taking it? Yeah, because again, I guess just in I guess corrections. One thing about corrections, guys, if I may, and maybe Denise could also comment on this, is that it's not that we don't feel sympathy. And we are empathetic, but the funny thing is that in corrections, people utilize vulnerability as a weapon, and then it forces you to become cold because you see it just as another excuse as opposed to ownership. So it's not like, okay, if I saw someone that abused a child because they were an abuser. I mean, at one point, maybe I empathize a little bit with them when they were children, but now as a grown adult where you have the power to change things and instead you repeat the pattern, I can't empathize with that. I don't even want to begin to even make the effort to empathize with that.
Well, it's more about understanding that what they have and that they're unable to make different decisions, and therefore you're going to have to deal with that appropriately.
Now, I want to go back to 2018 real quick because I know this is going to be utilized. Again, this is his past history, and if it does go to trial, the defense is not going to want this heard, but the prosecutor, I believe, is going to be able to get this across, and this is going to be the incident with Promise Faith. Again, what he did to her at 10 weeks is really unforgivable. But in 2018, Jacob abused his infant daughter, leaving her permanently disabled with cerebral palsy, brain hemorrhaging, and fractures. Despite the severity, his sentence was reduced, work release, probation, and treatment instead of prison. And guys, I've done a lot of videos on this. I covered how the treatment worked, how he could also play the game. There's a lot of good dialogue now. I would recommend that you go back and check it because I really did my research on that. And that was before I was able to get Denise on. Now that I have Denise on, it would be good to maybe partner up with you again and revisit one of those dialogues. So if you get a chance, there's a dialogue. I actually did 2 dialogues. One, how they can manipulate the system. And then 2, how it actually works, how they go through counseling, do the risk assessments, the sign-offs. I think you would find it really, really interesting. And then maybe we can revisit that later in the week, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I thought like the defense framing would be his untreated trauma kept driving destructive behavior. And then the view of the prosecution or the critics would be he had prior warnings. Continuing was a conscious choice. So now basically you have what the defense may say is untreated trauma kept driving destructive behavior, but then you may have the prosecution or the critics say, okay, yeah, all right, whatever. He had warnings, but yet his continuing was a conscious choice. So when someone already has a prior child abuse conviction, how should the justice system respond? So if we look at 2018 and what he did, and then now what happened in 2025, and the lawyers want to come in and push his child abuse history while he was abused. I mean, not what he did, but while he was abused or lived in that type of home, how should the justice system respond to that?
Well, honestly, back in 2018, I'm surprised he got off with such a light warning because the crimes that he committed were something that a therapist would look at a little bit more in depth about. I mean, again, sometimes, kids, there's some abuse there, but it's sort of a symptom that there's a real deep pathology there. And, the fact that I would have surprised me if he didn't repeat. the charge and the crimes were so severe. I mean, it's not all that surprising that something else happened afterwards.
Yeah, and low risk doesn't mean no risk. And it's funny because some blame the judge because the judge gave a lenient sentence, including the prosecution team. But some are saying, nah, prosecutors, you could have fought that. So it's a big back and forth. There was a letter that was released that really tried to go into detail of who's to blame. I hate that. You know what? If I rather someone just take accountability, it will give us more faith as opposed to people just pushing the buck and then pushing the blame. So do standard programs like parenting classes or anger management work for people with deep trauma histories?
No, it depends. Again, it's the severity of the trauma. I mean, when they're starting to sort of act on lack of impulse control, now we have a different problem. So, when somebody like this, the parenting classes and the anger management classes, they're not likely going to do a whole lot.
Let me see if I could pull up a picture of Promise Faith. I'll do it on my phone because I want to ask you something. Promise Faith, Haro. So this may be. So this was her. Soon after, I guess she was. This is after she got beaten. So this is what she looked like after. But I want to show you something more recent.
Okay.
Let me show you something more recent because there's a picture of her where she's older. This is her, I think, in the hospital. Let me show you this one.
Yeah, very sad.
But I want to show you when she's, let me show you just one more other picture.
Yeah.
But I want to show you the picture of her. There's a picture of her 7 years later. Let me just put, it's not that many pictures of this young lady. Let me just put, bear with me, guys. I want to try to see if I can find the picture of her. That picture is very hard to find. I try to always look it up. Hold on. It's one. Oh, there it is. I got it. This is her. May not be 7 years later. I don't know, but it's definitely a few years after the incident.
Yeah. Can you hold it down just a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Whatever you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Now,
when I was in nursing school, I did a rotation in a pediatric hospital, and it was more long-term. And a lot of the children there had been victims of abuse, and really hard because they'll never have a normal life. So they had feeding tubes and they had neurological issues, and it's a really tough place to be. Very sad for these children.
Let me ask you a question as a counselor perspective. Let's say I lose control one moment. My daughter starts flipping out, young kid. I expect her to reason, but obviously she can't. But I just want control, and I flip out. I hit her once. I get very upset with myself. I call to check myself. I call to report it, get her help right away, and then maybe go to some anger management classes. But I did everything after the fact, which is a good thing. I followed through. That may be a person you could say, but what about if it's repetitive and then that's the final result, what I just showed you, and now the person says, oh, they can get anger management, we could try to change them. So can you tell me what the difference is between the two?
Absolutely not. So the first example that you gave me, as soon as the incident happened, you took responsibility. You're like, oh my goodness, you make a phone call, you make an appointment with a therapist, you say, this is not a way to handle the fact that, my kid's not listening to me. So what I'm looking for is the lack of remorse and taking some accountability and responsibility and wanting to do something different. The other one is just somebody who keeps doing the same thing over and over. And, this first situation in 2018, I mean, that child will never recover from that. To think that somebody can go to an anger management class and all of a sudden change and rehab is just really unrealistic.
Let me ask you a question. Is it common, or do you get, I know obviously if I hit a child, a lot of people may say, well, maybe they don't report because they're afraid of the consequence and all, but still the right thing is the right thing, and you'll have to deal with the consequences because that's part of stepping up and doing the right thing. But do you find that a lot of parents maybe a situation does get the best of them, they overreact, but they do wind up immediately doing the right thing and then seeking help?
Or they'll come into my office and they'll say, I just can't seem to manage my temper, and, can you help me? I mean, so it might not go like the legal route where they're, sort of turning themselves in, but they'll come in for counseling and say, I can't seem to manage my temper, and this is something I really want to sort of get ahead of.
And
those
this
are the
is on their own will?
well.
And
What's that?
This is their own will. This
Yes.
is them coming to you.
Right. Or it's the wife or the husband that comes in and says, okay, so you hope that, let's say the person themselves don't recognize it, but then the wife or the husband will come in and say, listen, this dynamic has to stop. And, when he or she acts up, my husband or my wife they overreact, and this is something we need to get addressed.
So recognition is good. It's easier to work with someone who recognizes what they're doing is wrong. Yeah. So if a family member brings them to you, then you have to kind of get them to recognize what they're doing is wrong and then work through. But if they come on their own, that shows more willingness to work with the program.
Sure. And let's just say that the partner comes in, or the wife or the husband, and yet the person themselves will not take any responsibility and so forth. Then I have a heart-to-heart with the husband or the wife, and I go, listen, this is a concern, because not only are, they're not taking responsibility, they're also not willing to get any help for it. And this is something you need to take responsibility for, because you're the mother or you're the father of this child.
So if you get someone that's forced to you by the courts, Emmanuel Haro, Jake Haro would have probably been forced to take some type of anger management by the court. I would think your opinion of them right at first is going to be they're only here because they're being forced to.
Yeah. And then I would write that, whether or not during my assessment, if I felt like there was any remorse. And I would ask many questions to give that person opportunity. And if throughout the whole hour session, they're not taking any responsibility, that would go in my report to the judge.
Let me ask you, I got to ask this too. So if a lot of these guys, like I think Haro knew exactly, and it's in one of my videos, knew exactly what to say, very performative, but he probably did some research, kind of knew the answers, because I know at some point they're doing writing assignments and providing all this insightful answers that show low. How do you see through that?
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned that before, and I meant to comment on it and I didn't. They become very crafty and masterful with how they can pretend that they have empathy and they know all the right words and so forth. If you're a skilled clinician, you know how to sort of work around that, because that's sort of the performance. That's what they think that they should say. But if you keep asking questions and you ask them in the right way, eventually they can't keep up the show for too long. They'll say something or they'll insinuate something that all of a sudden will give you sort of the clear picture and give you a little bit more clarity of what you're working with or what kind of personality disorder you may be challenged with.
Yeah, I kind of like, even in corrections too, eventually the mask comes off.
It's true. They can't sustain it for too long.
Yeah, especially if it's lie after lie after lie. That gets pretty exhausting.
It does.
So we did, what kind of interventions are most effective? Oh, wait, no, hold on. No, this one. So we did, when someone already has a prior child abuse conviction, how should the justice sit? We did that. Next question I had is, do standard programs like parenting classes or anger management work for people with deep trauma history? I think we covered that.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so we'll go to the next part. I get the questions from the audience. Breaking or continuing the cycle. So most survivors do not abuse their children, but protective factors matter. So you have supportive adult relationships, early trauma-informed therapy, and learning emotional regulation and parenting skills. So Jacob's reality is, despite classes and probation, he lacked intensive trauma-focused treatment. And I don't know. I mean, do you think when you're forced to go to anger management, because I'm assuming that's what he would have to have taken, or some level of anger management partner with parenting or something there, and it's pushed by the court, so it's done through whoever it is that they, I don't want to say vendor out to, but whoever it is that is to provide that service. Do you think it really could be a really intensive trauma and focus, or do you think they're also going through the motions?
I think they go through the most in that sort of situation, I think they go through the motions. I think they do what they have to do to get through the class. I think they say that the class is very helpful for them, but ultimately it's unlikely that the cycle will be broken once they've acted out on certain things. So you're looking for what they've actually done that's a symptom of their personality disorder, particularly laying hands on.
What about the facilitator, though?
What do you mean?
Like, do you think that they're trying, or do you think that they're going through the motions as well?
Well, certainly as a facilitator, they have a responsibility to teach and to try to get them to learn how to, regulate emotions. But again, if they have a personality disorder and that part of the brain has not developed appropriately, it's not likely going to be effective.
Yeah, because I'm thinking after you see what they did to the child, how could the facilitator even put that at low risk?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, somebody skilled understands what they're looking at, understands the severity of it. Again, we have a range of whether or not you have antisocial personality disorder, but they're not violent, or then you get to the point where, again, they're acting on it. They're acting it out. And then there's not really much you can do for that. You can't really have them.
Right, because I think the low risk shows like, okay, you may put the person as low risk, but then you look at Promise Faith, the daughter from 2018. It's like, look what he's capable of. I wouldn't even classify him as low risk because of what he's done before.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, and then I have where is it? So what kind of interventions are most okay? So now. What kind of interventions are most effective in helping survivors avoid becoming abusers?
Well, again, what we see with many mental health problems or disorders is they go down generation after generation. You see it with things like anxiety and sometimes depression, but when you're getting into these personality disorders, they likely go again from generation to generation to generation. Unfortunately, that's just what they do. What we try to do with many of the other personality disorders is try to minimize the symptoms of them. Antisocial personality disorder is a different personality disorder, and it's on its own. It's not really one that's going to be able to rehab.
Right. And then I have what opportunities are often missed that could prevent future tragedies. Let me ask you a question. I did this in my last show or a couple of shows prior. Sometimes when we measure success, we measure it by successful outcomes. And what I mean by successful outcome is a person completed the program. I can mark that as a number, and it shows you 20 for 20. 20 came in, 20 completed. But I think also success could be noting that someone, even if they completed it, are just not ready. And therefore don't give them the completion, because I don't want people to misunderstand that I give them the completion. That means they're ready. No, it doesn't mean it. He bullshitted his way. He's not ready. So I think sometimes we may have people that want the success, project the success even into someone that's hopeless. And then they have the safety net of saying low risk. Because I could literally say low risk for anyone, and I'm free and clear. I told you it wasn't no risk, and I know you really can't say no risk because you really can't control someone else's outcome. But with that said, I wonder if if counselors may get invested in their own need for success or their own need for the numbers, that they wind up just put them down as low risk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or they completed all the cycle, but. Again, one of the things that people either like about my style or the way that I practice, like and don't like, is I'm pretty straightforward and realistic. And that's based on just experience and knowledge and expertise and all of that. With children, with this antisocial personality, you're looking for things that they've done before age 18 that are warning signs, like being abusive to animals, fire setting, not having any compassion or any remorse. And so a lot of times when I have a child that's sort of exhibiting these symptoms, I will say to the parents, listen, this is really concerning. This is what I'm concerned about. And a lot of the parents will be like, okay, I'm done with you. I'll go to find somebody else that will fix them. But, you really, as clinicians, we have a responsibility to, give them our honest opinion based on our expertise and knowledge. And a lot of times people just don't do that. They just sort of check them off and, they go on to the next problem. But I will tell you, the problem will not go away. It'll come out, because that's just what happens, unfortunately.
So I know there's always a chance for maybe a counselor or someone from mental health to project their own feelings onto someone that they could be working with. And obviously dealing with someone like Jake Haro or the Kohlbergers of the world, they don't process the world the way we process it. So we may put too much into how we think they may feel, when in actuality they're never going to feel that. They don't know how to process those type of feelings, let alone live by those feelings. Yes. But is there any way that there may be someone else that can oversee the counselor to keep things a bit more objective, that maybe comes in once in a while, like as a supervisor sign off that, hey, I know you said this person's great, but in my interactions with them, I just don't feel they're sincere. So on your end, they completed the program, but I'm not going to sign off on what would be needed for the next step for him to get approved by the judge to get released and have more kids.
Well, and I will tell you that a lot of the attorneys and judges and so forth, they will find therapists and people that they can refer to, people that they really sort of appreciate their skills and abilities. I mean, they're not really going to refer to somebody who's just going to sign off and give it back, because eventually when there's a repeat offense, everybody's looking at the history. Well, what did the therapist say? Well, what did the prosecutor say? What happened? Because again, when I said these things are not going to go away, they're just going to repeat in another cycle, and then everybody's going to have to take responsibility.
So hey, Denise, what would happen if, I did it in my last show, but I actually wasn't able to answer this question. I just came to mind as you were saying this. What happens if they go through all the program that they're supposed to go through, pass the homework assignments, pass their attendance, which seems to matter the most, but then does the risk assessment after the completion, and they don't pass the risk assessment? What would happen next? I know it gets sent to the judge, but what happens?
Yeah. So then I would say something like, in my professional opinion, although he or she has completed the parenting class and so forth, I still feel he or she is high risk for, reoffending or whatever, and hoping that the judge will take that into consideration. And then a lot of these actually. So I'm pretty skilled at them. And I know they sound really complicated, but once you've done a lot of them, I guess it's with what you do. You sort of know what you're looking for. You've seen patterns, you've seen behaviors, and it's definitely a skill.
And then obviously you would expect a lawsuit coming from, let's say in this case, Jake Haro at that point, right?
Yeah.
Because he would say, hey, I've been to every class. I passed the homework. I did all this. I don't know how I failed.
Yeah.
So how does that, how do you, now you have to lean on your experience, which it could be very subjective, but still your experience. How do you defend that when the evidence says that they've passed everything?
Well, probably in your narrative, you would talk about some of the things that you're sort of basing your conclusion on. Like, I had an in-depth discussion with Mr. Haro, and although, he says this, he did not at all seem remorseful about that based on what he said here and so forth. So you're using a lot of language that's supporting your conclusions.
And can you lean on, so here's the funny thing too. You're put in a position where you're meant to try to help the person cultivate something good. But if you can't, are you, even though they passed everything, are you still able to lean on what they did prior to the sessions? Like the abuse of Promise Faith, to say, hey, I know we went through this, but to be honest with you, after talking to him and seeing what he's done before with Promise Faith, I just don't feel comfortable passing this individual.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that taken as part of the risk assessment there, that behavior before they got put into the programming?
You're certainly looking at that. You're factoring that in because that's part of the history. And then you're looking at, what they've done, they've completed this course. It's interesting to me, though, a lot of times when they need to do parenting courses and they need to do, usually there's a lot of requirements. More often than not, they don't complete them all. So it's rare that I see them, they go through the whole thing and they've completed it all. Usually they've dropped out. They've gone to 2 or 3 sessions and they've dropped out. They never did follow up because usually there's some cost involved. And a lot of times I don't know that I've ever seen anybody actually go through all of the courses and requirements that are needed.
And that's interesting because it makes me think that if somebody was trying to manipulate the system, they actually may do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because no one normally does. And one last question before we get to this next part is if I'm a counselor and I see what happened to Promise Faith, and now the person's put into my program, I don't know if you're supposed to be objective. Are you supposed to, I know you said you're supposed to consider that, but can that be the main pivot? Like, can I look at him and say, hey, I'm going to tell you something right now, before he gets into programming, what he did with that little girl, we'll go through the moments, but I'm not going to pass him either way.
Well, what I would probably say to him is, tell me a little bit about Promise Faith. Like, I would want to hear him tell the story of, I don't know, when she was born and what she was like as a baby. And it's interesting because they may start off a little polished, but as the story goes on, it's very apparent that there's really no connection. And, you can say, well, what exactly happened? And the way that they describe it, like all of a sudden, everything's just not adding up.
That's interesting.
So again, they can be polished, but they can't sustain all of, like, there's so many lies that or things that they fabricate and so forth that eventually their story just doesn't add up.
So you feel the disconnect somewhere.
You do. At some point, you'll see and feel and hear the disconnect.
It's funny because I had Joe Pangaro on and we discussed this about one of the episodes about Haro, but we had Rebecca, the wife, in as well. And we thought that maybe the wife would be the one you could flip because, we still think because of his history, Jake Haro's the one that probably did something. And the wife, even though she's part of the cover-up, whatnot, she could have done it. Who knows? But right now we just have more evidence and context to believe that she could maybe have assisted. Maybe he has some control over her. But he said when I would interview her, he goes, I would be pulling on that maternal instinct as best I can. Yep. You love her. She's your daughter. She's a beautiful thing. What was it like when you first held her? What would you like? And that's exactly what you kind of said, because you would sense that in the good moments, there's a connection. And then all of a sudden, when you start pushing what he did, you would expect some level of remorse to come through because the comparison, how you're viewing the beautiful moment, all of a sudden you put in the worst of reality, and then it's got to create something in the individual. And if it doesn't, that's got to be a hell of a trigger.
Yes. Absolutely. And so if nothing really starts to shift, this is concerning, that all of a sudden they're telling this very sad story and something that should be very touching and heartwarming. And all of a sudden it's not that way.
And so, it's extremely smart, Denise, because I'm thinking about it in my head right now. So again, I'm very empathetic. I can kind of, so tell me if I'm right. You're the expert, but let's say I'm the person that did the wrong thing, and so you try to draw me in with something nice, and I'm starting to remember the good times, and then you quickly go into maybe something that is the worst of my choices. If I was faking it, I would probably act immediate to that. But if I was not faking it, I think it would be slowly coming to the surface. Like if I would want it to be performative, I'm going to go the extra mile. When you say it, maybe I'll throw some tears out, do whatever it is, but it would be real quick and wouldn't really last long. But I think that if I was true and sincere, I would build on what you're saying. Then when you push the harsh reality, and I have to kind of blend that with, the beautiful moment I had with the child, I'm definitely going to be building up, because now I have a conflict to my picture. I'm picturing this beautiful moment with this harsh reality, and then the harsh reality starts to overpower my vision until the point where it does start to build up, and then eventually there is some emotion. So would you say if someone quickly reacts kind of overly dramatic, but very quickly, it's performative to some extent?
Sometimes too, I'll give them a lead in, like I'll say, gosh, she sounds like she was a really cranky baby. That must have really been a pain in the neck to deal with. Like, so I'll open the door a little bit. And a lot of times that's when I see it come out. It's like, all of a sudden the energy will shift and they get very sort of cold and so forth. So sometimes I will sort of, again, give them a little bit of a window
Like,
to,
is it like giving them permission to admit the worst thing they've ever done?
well, I'm just sort of introducing the fact that I can get that the kid was, I don't know, cranky or difficult or something. So I sort of like, I wouldn't say I get on their side, but I certainly will offer like, oh, it sounds like, she was really difficult since she was a toddler. And, and all of a sudden they'll go, yep. And then they start to like really tell me about something. And this is sort of when the true sort of personality sorts to, again, sort of surface.
Yeah, because they have to trust you to tell you the deepest, darkest secret.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, it's good to know there's people like you out there that can see the bullshit. I will guarantee you guys, if you're watching this, I will guarantee you, and guys, I know Denise, Jake Haro would have never passed you.
No.
I guarantee that.
Mm-hmm.
Last part I got here is social, moral, and legal implications. So trauma helps explain behavior, but cannot erase accountability. I wanted to put that there. And I'm going to say that again because I think that's important. So trauma helps explain behavior, but cannot erase accountability. And I think that's where the lawyers come in, and evidence is against them. So let's see if we can minimize accountability and maybe see if we could draw some sympathy, which I think honestly that's going to backfire, but only because it doesn't equate. You can't feel sorry for this guy after what he did to promise faith, and now you have a dead child. Emmanuel. So the legal dilemma is, should courts consider a traumatic past when sentencing, or does it risk minimizing victim suffering? And then the core tension is compassion for a defendant's background versus justice for innocent children like Emmanuel. So how do we balance empathy for someone's traumatic past with accountability for their harmful choices?
Well, I mean, certainly what you look at people's past. I mean, you have compassion and so forth. Again, but you still have responsibility. And just because something happened doesn't mean that it's okay that you acted on impulse or anger or whatnot. But it's interesting when you put up moral and legal implications. As a therapist, a lot of times, you think, oh, well, I'll just write this up and, and give the guy a pass or whatever. But what I do personally is I go into like a really quiet space and I go, what do I know is the right decision in this case? Because this is my moral responsibility. Yes, I have legal responsibility, but I also have moral, that my decision will affect somebody else's life if I don't sort of have the courage to write what I know that it is based on my judgment, based on my knowledge, based on my skill set. What do I know is the right decision for this case?
Yeah, and I wish that was done back in 2023.
Me too.
Unfortunately, the case happened in 2018, but they didn't charge him until much later. And finally, he was found guilty and gave that shitty sentence on 2023. And I have one more question for this part is, should a history of child trauma influence sentencing in abuse cases? And I kind of, at the end of the day, even if you want to be sympathetic, they're still dangerous.
Mm-hmm. They are dangerous. And it really has nothing to do with it. I mean, you have to see the crime or whatever they've done. And then that has to be, that's what has to be prosecuted. I feel bad for him that he had a tough upbringing, but there are a lot of people that have had a similar upbringing that don't grow up and do a lot of damage and violence.
And that's funny because I have two more questions when it comes to the, kind of rounding about the show. That's it. We kind of covered all the sections. So just more closing thoughts. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly what you said. I got Jacob Haro's case shows the cycle of abuse is real, but not inevitable. I think that's extremely powerful because, maybe it is real. It could happen, but you can fight it. That means if you could fight it, then you got to believe that there is some conscious choice that you're making to allow it to happen.
Well, and it's interesting because I have had many clients in my office that have grown up in a very abusive home, and they'll say, and because of that, I've chosen, I'm not going to have children. I just don't know if I'm equipped. I don't know if I have, and for that, I admire them. I mean, that they've come to that conclusion that, they don't feel like they are properly equipped to have children of their own. You got to give them a lot of credit for that.
No, I agree with that. You know what's funny? I just always do this wacky comparison. I know of people that will go into corrections, and males will tell you, I'm not going to work in a female prison because I know me. Mm-hmm. So put me with men, I'll be good, but don't put me with women. Or however, just a bit of a comparison. But yeah, I thought that was I definitely believe in that. I think that it takes a lot of courage to admit that vulnerability and then to stand up and say, you know what? I'm just not going to put myself in a situation where it's not even about them. It's about they don't want to hurt somebody else. So I don't think it's a selfish choice. It's not like I'm not going to put myself in a situation where it's what they're basically saying is I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I can hurt somebody.
Yeah. Or like in my case, where I'm not going to help somebody. So there's certain cases that I get where I don't feel like I'm the right fit for them. And so then I have to take accountability saying, I'm not sure that I'd be the right counselor for you. I can refer you, or I'd like you to continue your search or whatever. But, again, that's part of taking responsibility for, our choices.
No, I love that. And I said, so systems often miss red flags and fail to provide trauma-informed intervention. And bottom line, we can seek understanding to prevent future abuse, but explanation cannot become excuses. I have two more questions here. So Denise, what should people understand about the connection between childhood trauma and adult violence?
Well, certainly when I'm doing history, that's something that I factor in. I'll ask them, do you have any history of trauma? I used to say, is there any trauma that you want me to know about? And I am asking about like parents and upbringing and so forth, because if they've grown up in an abusive home, I'm factoring that into like how they're doing, as far as mental health. Maybe it's just a lot of anxiety, maybe it's some PTSD, but that's all part of the puzzle that we're trying to figure out to see, how to make a solid judgment or diagnosis.
Yeah. And for me, I think we kind of discussed it, but for me, I would say it's not an excuse.
Correct. It factors in, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah, I love that. It factors in, but it's not an excuse, because if it factors in, then my next question would be, well, what did you do about it? Because maybe at that point, it's not about what others could have done for you, but rather what in the concern, what could you have done for yourself?
Yeah. Did you get some help for it? Did you, and so you're wondering, like, because at some point you're aware that, this has impacted you. Okay. And that's great. Awareness is fantastic, but then you have to do something. You have to go get some help to process some of this. And some people do a great job and some people just sort of forget about it, but it's going to come out one way or another.
Right. And I think again, something working in corrections, I've learned that, what can draw sympathy can also be something that is outward blame.
Yeah.
So be careful what you allow as sympathetic, because even with me, even with corrections, I learned that when someone tries to make me feel guilty, I take it as, are you blaming me? I guess it's the shield you put up. But same thing here. When someone tries to draw sympathy, I see it for some reason as a blame game. So I'm very careful in how I apply that, because I think at home, obviously it's my family. They're closer to me. I will have levels of guilt with them, of course.
Right.
I'm sure I get blamed on a lot, and I'll probably take onus to all that. But for someone on the outside that I know is just not that good of a person, and they're trying to blame everybody else and never once taken accountability, there's no way I'm going to be able to give you sympathy. I just can't.
Well, it's manipulative was what it is.
Yeah, and I got the book on that. It made manipulation decoded, available now on Amazon. Thanks, Denise. That wasn't planned. One last question, Denise. How can we identify and treat individuals with Jacob's kind of background before they harm children?
The only way that really that this gets taken care of is he's got to go into jail or prison. I mean, unfortunately, it's not something he's going to be able to rehab from. He's just going to eventually reoffend. He's done it twice. I mean, this is pattern.
And I have, I guess as we wrap up into closing, it said, let's see, developmental trauma disorder, have repeated exposure to violence. We kind of covered all this. So guys, we did cover a lot during this episode. And then I think I would like to have Denise on later in the week. You tell me, guys, if you want to see it. I would like to maybe go over if you have a chance, I have an episode I posted up where we talk about the risk assessment, all this other stuff. And, maybe we could talk about maybe specific experience that you have where you saw people playing the system. And if I was a counselor, what would be my best defense against that? So Jacob Haro doesn't make it to that next level where someone decides to make them a low risk. I would think, to be honest with you, because of what he did, as I mentioned before, regardless of what he takes or whatever it is, he automatically should have been a high risk.
Exactly. Right. Based on the nature of the crime, automatically high risk.
And then, what the funny thing is, I think when you have all these different departments, they all work in like silos technically. And at the end of the day, they're going to protect their own interests instead of really working at what's best for what needs to be done. So I think that the people that even do the risk assessment, they'll put low risk because there's liability there. So I'm not going to put no risk. I'll put low risk. So I protect myself, but then I give something to the judge for the judge to be able to lean on because the judge, he needs something. So now the judge makes the decision, but he's able to lean on what I guess whoever the facilitator was and their results. And it's right at the end of the day, all we're doing right now, guys, and this is sadly, is we're passing the buck to the next person who wants to avoid liability and actually really getting involved and saying, no, this isn't right because of what the person did. We may have to go to court on this, but that person really should not be around children. I don't care whether they passed it or not. Because I think at the end of the day, for some reason, everybody's so worried about violating someone's rights when at the end of the day, I think when you cross a line and you violate the rights of others, then your rights become under consideration and discretion.
I agree.
I wish that more people. Hey, anything you'd like to say in closing, Denise? Where can I find you? I know you got some stuff you're working on right now.
Well, yes, I would encourage everybody to visit my website, DeniseSchonwald.com. I've written a few books, lots of podcasts on there, a lot about my background and my expertise. So you can connect with me at DeniseSchonwald.com.
And I'm definitely going to have you on a lot more. I'm thinking maybe if it works for you, I know you said you had to never tell me you have a flexible week. Just tell you that right now. But I'm thinking maybe either tomorrow or Wednesday or latest. I want to try to put a show up maybe every other day. I'll try to get myself into some rhythm. But I do want to do something about female sex offenders because, excuse me, it just keeps coming up on my feed. And there was a case I was looking at today that just kept on coming up my feed about it's a Michaela Ford. She was a teacher. Yeah, Michaela Ford. Guys, if you're familiar with the case, let me know. But I think whether it's not so much about that case, but we can use it as a foundation to explore female sex offenders. What makes them a little bit more different than male sex offenders? Why are they not as reported as much? What's their grooming process like? I mean, we kind of know what a male grooming process is. What's a female groomer like? And believe it or not, I do have some experience with sex offenders because I worked as an associate administrator in a sex offender unit with those that are under Megan's Law, along with those that are civilly committed. Plus, I started my career at a female prison for 9 years, and I did work with female sex offenders. So I thought it was extremely different. One of the differences I could put right now is when you deal with male sex crimes, and let's say they're in regular prisons, they're more secretive, where the females weren't as secretive. But when I went to the male sex offender treatment unit, there were no secrets there. Everybody knew. And then it was separated by tiers. So basically, pretty much a sex offender in a regular prison would be looked at as prey because of their crime. But when you go into a sex offender unit where they're all sex offenders, if someone raped a 17-year-old, they're held at a higher status than someone that rapes children, or someone. It's just a very hierarchical. But there is a dynamic there. I've seen it. I thought that was very unique. A lot you can learn when you just sit back and let the world play itself out.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
All right, so maybe tomorrow or Wednesday, I'll see if I can put something together and we could run with that. And as always, Denise, love having you, and I'll give you a buzz tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
I thank you, Denise.
Okay, bye.